And he kind of was just coming into I don't know, Washington or New York or somewhere. And he just casually says to me, you know, oh, there's a chance I might get stopped on the way in. So just carry on, just carry on, what we would do anyway. Was and don't worry about me. And he kind of said, well, why would they stop you? And he said, well, I've lied on my immigration form. This is your boss, And he said, why have you lied? How do you mean you've lied on your immigration form? He said, well, there's that little box that says, have you ever been involved in espionage? And I said, yes. He said, well, I put no. And he said, it's not true.
Amos Madra.
Tony Auffret, a very warm welcome to you, author of the thrilling novels, The Death of a Smoker and Unsavoury Business. Really interesting titles. A warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for the invitation, Amos.
So, Tony, your story is really interesting. You didn't start off as a writer or, novelist. You were more in the sciences. That was your background, and academia. And you found yourself here today as a novelist. Take us back, talk to us about the journey and how we've ended up here.
Well, it's a strange journey. I mean, in many ways, it's simply a career that was really directed completely by chance, by way of fixed term contracts and probably serial redundancies that and added to which I did once say to a friend of mine, I don't think I ever succeeded in anything I ever set out to do. And he was older than I was and a lot wiser. And he said, yes, he said, but did you enjoy doing it? And I said, yes. He said, well, stop complaining then. You've got a lot to be thankful for. But yes, I started out as a wannabe academic. I kind of, I think that when you're a teenager, you just go with the flow, and go with the flow for me was, I did well enough at O level to stay at A level. I was doing well enough at A level to go to university. I was doing well enough at in my first degree to actually think I could persuade someone to let me do a PhD, which I did. And then kind of where you go after that is quite bad. Is a lot of luck and quite bad chance. I came across an advert for a postdoc actually at Cambridge University, and that was an interesting story because there was a misprint in the advert, and it was in one of the big scientific magazines, but it was looking for somebody to research on what they called the secret thing of peptides and proteins, which was a bit intriguing. But it turned out that the secretary who'd phoned in the advert had a lisp, and what she actually said was the sequencing, but the person on the other end misheard her and actually printed this advert that said the secret thing. So it was irresistible. So I went there and did a couple of postdocs in Cambridge. Worked with some very well-known people. I mean, I worked for a time at a laboratory of molecular biology, which actually has more Nobel Prize winners than most countries. It was very. I won't say I was out of my depth, but there were some very interesting people there. And then, but it was a time when in the 1960s the universities had expanded, and when I started my PhD, they were still taking on lecturers. You could finish your PhD and go straight into a university lectureship. By the time I finished, they'd filled up, and the universities were full of young lecturers. They weren't really going to take on very many. Because there weren't the vacancies anymore, and people weren't going to retire for a long time. So, and then the government brought in various schemes to try and keep people in universities until the situation got better. But we ended up having they were all fixed term contracts. You start having a family. You've got to do other things. So at that point, I moved into industry. First of all, into making scientific instruments, which was quite unusual for me because I'm not mechanical in any sense of the word. And that's kind of that sort of. It kind of got one of these things about every 7 years. I don't know if they rumbled me, but after about 7 years, I got made redundant. So I then went into biopreservation, a small company in Cambridge. Isn't quite the same as the small company that's in the death of a smoker, but there were interesting things that happened. So I mean, you could not make this up. But I applied for a license to import a chicken vaccine because we worked on stabilization of biological materials for clients worldwide. And what I didn't know was this chicken vaccine was actually on the germ warfare list. And what I didn't know is the country I imported it from, certainly in the 1990s, was not classed as a friendly power, which kind of was interesting enough. But then it just so happened that the guy who ran, I mean, only 6 of us in the company, the guy who ran it really was an ex-spy. As a young man after the war, he'd spent a couple of years in the Soviet sector of undercover in the Soviet sector of Berlin. It was an exciting thing to do when you're 18, and you're fed up of being shot at. But the other strange thing is we just happened to have a visiting Russian scientist in the lab who worked on the same site as the Soviet germ warfare outfit over in Novosibirsk and Kosovo. And you couldn't make this up. Well, things happened. We didn't put. It took us a long time to connect them up, but we suddenly, we realized after a while actually somebody was probably just making sure we were behaving. And I always thought it would make a good story, but never got around to it. And like most other companies that I worked for, that particular company was too successful. Our parents sold us off to a US corporation, and I didn't want to go to the US, so I moved again, eventually into the pharmaceutical industry, and worked for a major pharmaceutical company. And well, actually, I lasted longer there. I lasted probably about 10 years there before they rumbled me and made me redundant. And I thought, well, I've had enough of this. Next time I'll make myself redundant. I'll start my own business. So I started my own one-man consultancy business, which was reasonably successful. But when you're in that line of business, you either have far too much work to do all at once, or you've got nothing. There's no even flow. And my late wife had a chronic pain problem, sadly, but that meant that she couldn't really go to bed until she was completely exhausted. Otherwise, the pain just kept her awake. So it meant she never got up early in the morning because she went to bed late. And so, when I didn't have any business on, I just needed something to do in the mornings. And eventually I kind of got round to the idea that maybe I could try and write that book that, based on what had happened to me at that point 20 years earlier. So it started off just part-time in the mornings. Those mornings I didn't have any other work to do. I kind of just started, writing the book. And after you've invested a certain amount of effort in, you think, well, I may as well try and see if I can get it published. So you then learn a lot about the publishing world, and spend a couple of years trying to get somebody on board to actually publish it. Eventually, you find somebody, and that's how So that's really the journey as it happened. But it was never intended. It's just the way it happened, really.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't. I'm going to say this. I shouldn't really say this, but the reason that there's a second book is I couldn't think of a good way of dealing with the suspected villain in the first one. So I kind of left it hanging a bit. But realized, at some point I'd have to sort that out. So I did have an idea of how to sort that out. Having sorted that, I'm now finding people are saying, well, when's the third one coming out? And I'm thinking, I never planned a third one. I might have to get my thinking cap on again.
Oh, I mean, this is a remarkable story. Just to think how the whole sequence of events and how it fits in, with the books that you've written, it's incredible. I think there's a term for it: planned happenstance.
I can go with a happenstance for sure.
But I mean, to think, you're there at work and you've got these spies, top secret events happening, and it's incredible. And finding the time in the mornings, to put this together. And sorry for the loss of your late wife. And I think when you reflect back on it, it must mean a lot to you, this book, because at the time you'd written it, The Death of a Smoker.
It is. I mean, anybody who's thinking about writing a book, I'd say do it, even if you don't get it published. But actually, once you get a copy in your hand, it is a great feeling that actually you've done something. Unfortunately, like most things, once you've done it, you start thinking about that's over and done with, and you suddenly start thinking, well, what am I going to do next? So you kind of, it is a great feeling to actually hold it in your hand. And when you start seeing that actually some people are actually people you've never heard of and that will never know are actually buying it, it's great. But like most things, you've got to be realistic about it. It's great, you enjoy it while it's happening, but I think the truth is most books don't sell millions. You have in fact you've got there, the fact you've published it that's great. That you just be thankful for that. Thankful that some people buy it.
And it's something that outlives us, it stays there, long after we're not around, and who knows what comes of it in the future, but it is a legacy, isn't it?
Yes, I mean it's I think people ask me why did you do it? And I think the truth is I just thought I'd try, but you come out with I fancied the fame and fortune, or you say, well, I wanted to leave something behind, but I think it's after you've done it, you realise that yes, there is something there. You go through. I mean, you do leave little things through life. I mean, obviously, if you work in science, you start publishing, papers in scientific journals, which eventually disappear. And if you're lucky, somebody else has the same idea about 20 years later and revisits it. And then you move into industry, and if you're in the R&D side, you tend to sort of the odd patent. You generate the odd patent, which again, it's interesting, but it's probably not. Neither of those were as good as actually publishing a book. And when it lands on your doorstep and you open the box, it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, without giving too much away, we know that Unsavoury Business has just recently been published, so that's now available to purchase. But before we get into what the audience might expect, take us back to The Death of a Smoker. What was the story, without giving too much away?
The story is, I mean, I wanted to create kind of characters that were believable. So, I mean, although the characters aren't based on there aren't people I knew, I did work in a small biotech company in Cambridge, and we did come to we're pretty sure we came to the attention of MI5. And that kind of the book's not about, although that's really the what I hang the story on. So there's a little bit about the company and some characters there, and what's actually going on there. But it's and I think when you create a character, you almost start with the coat hanger, and you just hang on bits of people you've met. So I think anybody you create in a book, I think any author creates in a book is a kind of a mixture of bits of people they've come across over the years. But no, it's about kind of a small group of MI5 agents who for reasons that they don't really understand, and comes to light a little bit in the sequel. But they happen to live in a small office, not in the main MI5 building. And again, it's one of those strange things. I was walking down the street in London. I was in London on business, had some time to kill. I was in Westminster, so you wander around, and I came across this really extremely ordinary blue door in Tufton Street, which is, I'm not giving anything away to say that in the story these guys live in Tufton Street behind a blue door, and of course that blue door has actually become a fan of. There's a blue door on the cover of each book. It's just become a bit of a trademark, really, but it's really like these, what it's a bit of, there's a lot of bluff and not knowing what's going on, and it's a bit like sort of there's an element of MI5 investigating itself in order to hide the fact that it's actually doing something, and to put people off the scent. And obviously, like most of any book of that type has to have a villain or a suspected villain. So you create a villain, but in a way, I mean, when I wrote it, I didn't have a plot. I didn't have a plot set out. I had a series of events that had actually happened to me. So at one point, one of the characters receives a pretty anonymous grey file through the post, which turns out to be the rules and regulations for the prevention of the proliferation of chemical and biological warfare. And I know that title because when I opened my file, I suddenly thought, "Ooh, I'd better read this and see what I've been up to." There are various things that happened, and I'm not sure in reality if they all actually happened at the same time, but they all happened within the space of a couple of years. So they all got kind of pushed into the story. And so the MI5 unit go about investigating what's going on in this company, unaware that there is something going on, but it's not what they think it is. And of course the bad guy, the villain, does his best to mess things up, and it's really about kind of perhaps how real people might go about, if they were in that situation, what goes on, and how do they in the end, how do they stop the bad guy messing up something that's pretty important? Is what the story's about, but kind of saying what it was would give it away a little bit. But it's it's hopefully a bunch of believable characters, people that you might meet in any company you work in, who get, they just happen to work for MI5, but they're just ordinary people with, react in the ways that we would react. And they're not James Bond types, they're just folks you might meet on the street.
And that's usually the case, isn't it? It's just ordinary people who we walk past and wouldn't suspect.
Well, the gentleman who ran this company, sadly, he passed away a few years ago, but he was a few years older than I was, but he was my boss. After the company made him redundant. He retired, and we became friends after. We became very good friends actually after we stopped working together. But we were actually on a flight to United States. First time on business. First time we'd gone there together. And he kind of were just coming into I don't know, Washington or New York or somewhere. And he just casually says to me, oh, there's a chance I might get stopped on the way in. So just carry on, just carry on, what we would do anyway. And don't worry about me. And he kind of said, why would they stop you? And he said, well, I've lied on my immigration form. This is your boss, and he said, why have you lied on your, how do you mean you've lied on your immigration form? He said, well, there's that little box that says, have you ever been involved in espionage? And I said, yes. He said, well, I put no. And he said, it's not true. Yeah, at that point, you get on a plane with 300-400 other people. He can't go into too much detail, but he did eventually explain that as a young man, he was a Jewish German who got out just before the war, joined the British Army, but they were looking for natural German speakers who they could place in the Soviet sector to see what was good. He said it was all low grade stuff, but he said it seemed a better option to him than going out to the Far East and being shot at again.
Yeah.
So, but again, you wouldn't have suspected this. Well, he's quite a well-known. He was quite well. He was very well known in his own field, but you'd never suspect that he'd actually spent a couple of years as a spy, that's kind of the where it came from. These are just ordinary people that you wouldn't suspect did this for a living.
And I think that's what makes it really interesting. These unassuming characters who we see every day, but are really truly the superheroes of our lives, the ones that allow life to carry on as normal. And it's like you've taken a conscious step to bring a moral story to this. Am I right in saying that you wanted to leave the reader with something to think about at the end?
I think if I was honest and said that, it wouldn't be entirely true. I mean, the story kind of wrote itself. But yeah, in retrospect, it is about. I suppose it's. Well, one of the questions is, I think, is if the greater good is served, does it really? I think from what I've said already, I think it's probably no surprise that I don't deal adequately with the villain in the first book. So, but I think the question is, if the greater good has been served, does it really matter? Or is it? Can you forgive certain oversights or things that don't happen if actually the overall result is good? It was much better expressed in a friend of mine in the US who's written a couple of novels. He wrote one about the pharmaceutical industry and where something bad happened, but he did it much better than I did. But again, he really posed not directly, but after he thought about what he'd written, the question was, if the greater good is served, does it matter if something not so good happens? So I think that's probably but mine is a bit more subtle. Mine is to be honest, I wasn't sure. I couldn't find the ending that would deal with the suspected bad guy. So we ended up with a sequel.
Yeah, I think you're being very modest there. But again, this is a wonderful book you've written, and the sequel's out now. So talk to us about the sequel, and of course where we can get hold of it.
Well, you can get hold of it all good bookshops, but either but most bookshops are online. Most bookshops, if you want to get books from relatively unknown authors from small publishers, you buy them online rather than at your local bookstore, unless you happen to live near where I live, where my local bookstore does keep them. But no, it's this unsavory business is a little bit more like when you're working in a business where things are done on a need-to-know basis, it gets quite important to remember who knew what and when. So I mean, there's been a chance. It's set 4 years later, and there's quite by chance somebody's the suspected villain has been seen, and obviously the team are keen to go after him and finish what was unfinished in the first book. But unfortunately, there's a bioterrorist threat against the government, which that obviously takes more importance, and that's what they have to look at. And it's kind of, and I've set it in a, it's kind of, last place you'd expect something like this to be brewing might be in a small town in suburban Essex, which is kind of where I set it, or at least I set that where it's happening is there's a company involved, another small company involved, which just happens to be a small scientific instruments company. And it isn't the scientific instrument company I worked for by any means, but I've just felt comfortable writing about that kind of industry. So, so they have gradually, they start to ask the question, there couldn't be a connection, could there, between, because I think anybody who looks at the front cover of Unsavoury Business will think, oh, Greece, and that's a Greek door. But I mean, I have to be honest, before you buy the book, most of it occurs in the UK. But could there be a link? Is there a link to Greece? Well, could there possibly be a link to the bad guy? Could we possibly do something about it? So you get these threads, you try, and trying to pull it together, and what's going on, and then the other thing that comes out of it is, and it was actually suggested very early on in the first book, is somehow our secrets leaking out of this little group of MI5 people, and is it true? Is it happening? So I kind of weave those threads. There are not so much blind alleys, but I think when you write a book, you start to go on a path and you never quite finish it. But it's a bit like, I've left them in there, but in both books, because real life's like that. Not everything gets tied up very neatly at the end. So there are things that you think, well, what was all that? What was that about? Was that, was that connected, or was that? But reality, it's just, well, that's what life's like. Things happen that you don't see through the conclusion. They don't tie up. You possibly don't know what they were about anyway. It just adds to this kind of realism. And I don't intend to confuse the reader, but if it adds to this, the fun they have speculating, all the better.
Yeah, a real cliffhanger there. Will we expect a third novel?
You're now the fifth person who said. So I mean, if I can think of a plot, if I can think of a storyline that kind of I'm comfortable with, yeah, that they may well be.
Okay.
But I mean, I have to. I'll put my hand up. I have written the prologue.
Wow. Okay. So we've got a complete preview here. So we're very privileged. Thank you very much. We can expect, hopefully, a third one coming out soon.
Well, probably not soon. I mean, it takes a while. I mean, I think even after you finish writing it, by the time from the time a publisher accepts it, by the time you go through, you go through the editing and everything is great. With Unsavoury Business, everything looked. I mean, I thought it was perfect before I submitted it. I'd learned a lot writing Death of a Smoker. So I thought the manuscript for Unsavoury Business was perfect. Then I got the editor's first response and realized it was full of holes and mistakes. And so you work on that, and you go through a couple of rounds of that, and you think it's really perfect now. And then I think you get the final proof, and you think, oh, I better look at this. And so I think Unsavoury Business, we had the final proof, then we had the final proof, and then we had the final proof. So I have to say, on behalf of my publisher, Cranthorpe Millner, they have the most incredible patience. but it got to the point where I thought, well, I'm sure there are typos and possibly errors still in there. But if you can find them, dear reader, good luck to you, because I can't. But that whole process takes about 9 months. So things don't. It isn't. I mean, it isn't even in this age of digital publishing. It doesn't just happen overnight. So, and I have got to write it first. So you can probably wait a good, probably looking at good 2 years.
Absolutely. Wow, Tony, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you and just hearing your journey. And sometimes I say, truth is stranger than fiction, and just to reflect and think back on your own experiences and what you've been through, to think that you've come into close contact with some of these things, and things that we only watch on TV and read in books, and to hear this, and then for you to publish these wonderful books. It's been an absolute pleasure just hearing you speak about them so passionately as well. And of course, for the audience, they'll definitely want to learn more, so they can go to your website, which is tonyauffret.com. Am I correct in saying that? And then, of course, the books are also available, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, and pretty much wherever you get your books from.
Yeah, pretty much. Waterstones, W.H. Smith, wherever you buy your books from. Don't expect them to be in your local bookstore, but they're available online from all the major bookshops.
Okay, so The Death of a Smoker and the sequel, Unsavoury Business, which are all out now. Tony, thank you so much.
No, thank you for the invitation. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Amos.
Thank you. If you want some amazing inspiration, check out the videos next to me, and I'll see you right there.